yet? That's
No,
unusual.
maybe about 3 weeks ago we had a little snow, but it melted right away.
Okay. Interesting. No,
Yeah.
we've got maybe 2 or 3 inches, but it's not too bad.
Okay. Okay.
Well,
So
if
you're
you're,
just so this is like one of your videotapes you're doing.
yes.
It's not live or anything out to the world, or
It's not going to be live. No, it's going to be posted in clips
okay.
uh, over the next few weeks, and then after I post maybe 4 or 5 clips, I'll post the whole thing.
Okay. Sounds good. Sounds good.
Yeah. So if you need to go to the bathroom or anything, I can just cut that out, or I can edit anything out after.
Okay. Sounds good. Sounds good. Yeah, if I
All
don't have
right.
my glasses on, I can't even see you.
Oh,
So
really?
must be getting a little old here. It's just fuzzy without them. So
Well, luckily, as long as you can hear me, that's the most important thing. Well, I'll jump into it then if you're all right.
yeah, I'm all set.
This is Hannibal here from thehannibaltv.com. And today, as my special guest, is one half of the legendary tag team Demolition. Held the WWE tag team titles 3 times. He also held NWA tag team championships. He was also the Repo Man, Blacktop Bully, and several other gimmicks that we'll get into today. None other than Barry Darsow, Demolition Smash, all the way from Minnesota. How are you doing today, sir?
I am doing unbelievable. It's good to see you again. I haven't talked to you or seen you since I was up there. What was that, about 3 years ago?
Yeah, 3 years ago, you guys did a couple of events up here, and I was impressed at how thick you still were. You still looked like if someone tried to mess with you, you would definitely smash them.
Well, 3 years ago is different than now. Now I'm a little thicker down here than I was in the arms. But yeah, this COVID's kind of had me stuck in the house, and now they closed my gym down again here, and all that. But I'm feeling the aches and pains a lot now that I'm not in the ring anymore or any of that kind of stuff.
Oh, really? They've closed the gyms back in Minnesota, so you're one of the states that is more strict than, let's say, Texas or Florida.
Yeah, yeah. In fact, I think they're going to open up probably after Christmas again, but uh, it really spiked high here in Minnesota, and they closed all the restaurants, everything. You can just do takeout, and then now I just got uh, an email from the fitness club that they're going to open up at the end of the month. So now all of a sudden, all of the COVID-19 has really went down a lot in the last 2 weeks. So at Thanksgiving, it was at its peak. It was really bad. The hospitals were starting to fill up and everything. So it's opened up now, and people in Minnesota do a pretty good job with the masks and all that stuff. And it's not like New York where there's so many people, but it was a big problem here.
And you also had that other problem earlier this year with all those terrible riots that were going on.
Oh, terrible! I just don't understand how people can wreck people's businesses. It's no matter how upset or mad or whatever you are, or these people's businesses that are down there, they're incredible people. They got their whole lives invested in these businesses, and then they were just taken away in minutes from thugs is what it was, and um, nobody's helping the people in those businesses out again. I mean, they've lost their whole lives, and that's not important to those other people. But there's got to be a different way of getting your point across without ruining things. I believe.
Did you have a printing business at one time there?
Yeah, yeah. I owned a business with uh, a longtime friend of mine. Uh, we've been best friends since like seventh grade, and we started the business 15 years ago. So for 14 years, we've both been in there, 12, 14 hours a day. And last January, I sold it to my niece and nephew. So they've been running it, they bought it at the worst time with the COVID-19 coming up, but they did a really good job this year. And in fact, last night we just had our year-end meeting on what they can do better and all that kind of stuff. And they're doing really well. So I'm kind of retired now. I'm just going out and I was going to do a lot of appearances. We had we probably had 20 different appearances all lined up during this COVID, and a lot of them were in Europe and New York and everything. So we canceled everything. So when you emailed me to do this, it was like, yeah, let's go. I want to get back to work a little bit here. So thank you for having me on. But yeah, I sold the business and I loved it, and it's a different animal not having to go to work every day, and I'm busy all the time though. So in fact, I don't even know how I did all this stuff that I'm doing now with a full-time job like I had.
Yeah, it sounds like you kept extremely busy because you were still wrestling almost every weekend, it seems.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. Every weekend we were out, and then both Bill and I, a few years ago, I had a new knee done 2.5 years ago, right after I left you guys, and so then we just decided we're not going to get in the ring anymore, and we talked and we said we only want to go on the road twice a month is what kind of our goal was, because it's just getting to be too much, and we love the fans and we love all that, but it's just it's getting hard to get on these planes and get there 2-3 hours early, and all the stuff you got to go through. So yeah, we're excited now for when this opens up to get back on the road and see everybody again.
Well, to start this off, could you tell us a little bit about your childhood and where you grew up and what your family was like?
Yeah, definitely. I've always said I'm the luckiest guy in the world. I uh, I grew up in Robbinsdale, Minnesota, and my mom and dad I guess we were kind of like the Leave It to Beaver family. I got a brother and a sister, and my mom and my dad, and we grew up not with a lot of money, but we had a cabin, and both my mom and dad worked, and um, they instilled a lot of good things into us. But then by the time I got into sixth grade, they divorced, so then it was just my mom, and I was always in touch with my dad, but he wasn't involved very much with the family anymore. So we didn't have much money at all. My mom worked all the time and took care of my brother and my sister and myself, and I was always in sports. I played hockey, baseball, and football, and I don't want to brag, but I was pretty good at all of them. And my mom went to pretty much every game I had. My brother and my sister also did. So I was very lucky. I had a lot of backing that way. And with not having any money, and now later on, I realize exactly what my mom went through. She didn't make much money, and she always bought me the best skates, the best hockey sticks. Um, she really thought that the sports were going to be what was going to help me in my life, and which it did. And I've thanked her over the years because I've realized what she has done for me. And when she was spending all that money on me through all my sports, um, my brother suffered, my sister suffered. So my brother, he ended up, when he was in like eighth grade, ninth grade, he ended up getting a job. So he'd go to school and then he'd go work at a gas station and he'd do everything to help the family out. So that's the kind of brother I had. My sister was the same way. So um, I guess being young, you don't realize that, when how everybody else suffers for you when you're playing your sports. And when I played sports, I was never home. I was outside uh, probably, well, from the morning it was light till dark, and I'd go to school and I'd be out playing, and my mom would be screaming at me, "Get in! You have to have dinner!" during the winter season, I'd go to the park when it was during the Christmas vacation. I'd go down to the park early in the morning. I didn't come home till 9, 10 o'clock at night. And that was just how it was. And I had great friends, and we did everything together. Um, so then it ended up being where baseball was probably my best sport. I played Little League, Babe Ruth, and then right before high school, I played in the Mickey Mantle League, and I ended up I had a 744 batting average, so I could hit, and I had a lot of home runs. But I ended up playing hockey when I was in ninth grade. I played varsity hockey for the high school, which was a really big deal here in Robbinsdale. And then I was recruited by Herb Brooks to play hockey for the Gophers, but then I ended up signing for football at the University of Northern Iowa. So once I got there, I ended up staying a year, and they moved me to a position that I wasn't happy with. And when I left there, I got with one of my best friends and he was going to school up at Moorhead State. And I went up there and I moved in with him and a couple of his buddies. And then I ended up having a couple of jobs, but I started really training hard. I got on the powerlifting team at the YMCA up there in Fargo, North Dakota, trained with a few guys up there, and got into quite a few powerlifting contests and had a very good deadlift and squat. And my bench got a lot better probably 3-4 years later, but I'm thinking that was kind of lacking because my deadlift and my squat was so good. But anyways, after a year or two up there, I came back to Minneapolis and I started working at a bar down here, Grandma B's, and that's where Rick Rude and both the Road Warriors were working at this bar. So it was a pretty rough bar, and at that time I was probably 6'3", about 270 pounds, because I had to be under the 275 for the powerlifting contest I was in. I was a heavyweight and not a super heavyweight. So, anyways, it ended up being where a bartender there, his name was Eddie Sharkey. He was a professional wrestler for years, and he was in Vern Gagne's territory. And he pulled us aside one day, and he says, "Hey Barry," he says, "why don't you you want to get into wrestling?" I said, "Yeah." So both the Road Warriors and Rick Rude and myself, we ended up starting wrestling with Eddie Sharkey, and that's how everything got started. But I always wanted to write a book on my childhood, from how hard I worked in every sport that I did. It was like when I played basketball in the yard. We had a basketball hoop. My brother used to always tell me, "Barry, you got to shoot 100 shots a day to be good." Well, I shot 500 shots a day. And then they wanted me on the basketball team. Well, when we played hockey, he says, "Well, you got to be outside and you got to skate every day for an hour a day." Well, I was down there 8 hours a day. And I mean, that's how everything was. And I always, my favorite movie was The Sandlot. And I always thought that I was Benny on The Sandlot. I was the guy that was getting the neighborhood together and go out and play baseball. And, I guess the moral of the story is, if you want to get good at anything, you gotta practice, and you gotta really set your mind to it. And that's kind of what all of us here from Robbinsdale did for wrestling. We all, we didn't just go to Eddie Sharkey's camp. After the camp, we'd be in the backyard, you know, throwing drop kicks in the grass and punching each other and suplexing each other, and so it was a great childhood that I had. My brother is incredible. My sister was unbelievable, and my sister died 2 years ago, which was terrible. She was only 65 years old. But my mom's still alive, so my brother and I go see my mom. And the first time my mom ever seen me wrestle was at was in Minneapolis. I was probably already wrestling for 15 years or so, and I called her up. I said, "Mom, I'm going to be in Minneapolis. I got some tickets for you and my sister, front row seats, you know." And she always said that she never wanted to watch me wrestle. Well, I talked her into it. She went down there, and I was wrestling the Road Warriors and the Ultimate Warrior, and we were in a 6-man tag, and I ended up getting an elbow from the Ultimate Warrior and knocked out 2 of my front teeth. When my teeth came out, they just happened to fall right next to my mom. My mom about had a heart attack back then. That was the last time she ever watched me wrestle again. So, anyways, that was my childhood, and great time.
The fans on here always like to hear about personal best lifts. Could you tell us about some of your best lifts and bench press, deadlifts, squats, and maybe shrugs? Because I know you got those giant traps.
Yeah. Well, you know, I had quite a few partners training, but the one that was my best partner I ever had was Wayne Bloom. And Wayne Bloom was in high school, was this skinny, tall kid where his knees were bigger than his legs kind of a guy. And he was a basketball player. But by the time I hooked up with Wayne, and he went to Cooper and I went to Robbinsdale, that was the names of the 2 schools that are there. He used to train at Jesse Ventura's gym, and I trained at Jim Youngner's gym, the gym. And that later on, the Road Warriors ended up owning that with Jim Youngner. So Wayne was like I was when he had his mind set to something. He really pushed it. So I was just getting into powerlifting, and I knew Wayne from different friends and everything. And I went to Ventura's gym and said, "Hey Wayne, you and I ought to start training." And he says, "Yeah, I'm going to be leaving here. I'm going to go to the gym." So we ended up starting to train, and I was at that time probably about 250 pounds, and Wayne was about 210 pounds. But Wayne was super strong. And after about a year of training, we ended up going to our first meet. And I can't remember the numbers of everything that we've done and everything, but Wayne could deadlift more than anybody that I ever seen before for how old he was, and him and I are the same age, and for what his body looked like. So we ended up naming him Wayne the Train Bloom. His goal was always to beat Jim Cash, and Jim Cash was, and don't quote me on this, but from what I can remember, he was a 220 pounder, and he could deadlift. I think he was at like 849 or something like that. Yeah, I think that's what it was. Well, Wayne, he was deadlifting at this time probably about 750 pounds, and he was 200 pounds and skinny. And I always looked at Wayne and I said, "Jesus, here I'm 250 pounds, and I'm doing the same as him. He's stronger than I am." So he pushed me a lot. So I had to gain weight to get into the 275-pound class because I needed to be up at that 274 poundage, because at 250 I was giving away too much. And Wayne wanted to be in the 220 pounds, so we both had to put on 20 pounds. So we started eating and eating right, and the protein and all this stuff, and now all of a sudden in the gym, we're doing deadlifting 800 and 805. And this is back before they had these super duper suits and everything. So it ended up being I ended up doing 777 in a meet, and I think Wayne did like 765 or something, which was unbelievable for me being 40 pounds heavier than him. He was the deadlift king. And in that same, so I guess I should back up here. One of my first meets, I did like 410 or something on the bench. I did 625 on the deadlift and 650 on a squat, something like that. And then, so then later on, it ended up being where I did 777 on the deadlift. I did 783 in the squat. And then I ended up doing like 485 on the bench. And my bench was always the worst out of everything. But anyways, to make a long story short, I ended up tearing a tricep before a big meet, and in the gym I squatted 810, I deadlifted 820, and my bench was up in the five to 510 range. So it kind of knocked me out of that meet. And then at that time, then I started wrestling, and I think that was kind of where I was starting to get the injuries because you're taking all the bumps and you're trying to train. So then I started lightening up on everything. But Wayne kept on going, and Wayne ended up beating Jimmy Cash's national record, which was incredible. So as I got into wrestling, then pretty soon I couldn't really squat heavy anymore. I couldn't deadlift heavy anymore. And then I was down in New Zealand, and on TV there, I told the promoter that, when I was deadlifting, and he said, yeah, right. All these wrestlers always say that. Well, he put 700 on the bar down in New Zealand, and, no warm up or anything. I deadlifted that quite a few times, but I used to deadlift 700, 15, 20 times pretty easy. And Wayne was the same. And then my bench was always right around that 485 to 500. I couldn't, it was like I couldn't get stronger. And then I hooked up with Hercules Hernandez in Bill Watts's territory. And all of a sudden my bench was just starting to go, but I wasn't squatting or deadlifting heavy. So Herc and I ended up doing, 5.25 for, triples. And I told him, I said, my goal is to do a 600 bench. And he says, well, we're going to get to that. So anyways, it finally got up to the time. I did a 640 really easy. And he says, Barry, next week, he says, let's go for that 600. So we were in this old beat up gym in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And I warmed up, I did a triple at 5.25. And it was so easy. On the third rep, I put the bar back up and I tore my pec. And it sounded like a corn husk. Came right down on me. The bench that I was on was a rickety old bench, and it broke. So I can say my best bench was 5.25 for 3. But I know for a fact I was getting close to that 600 range. So that's where I was with the lifting, and ever since the tear in my chest, it completely changed my body. I, got a big hole in my chest, and then my benching, no longer I could really bench anymore. And after all the bumps in the ring, then pretty soon the deadlift is gone, and then the knees, then the squat's gone. But back in the day, I was pretty strong.
When you were on the road in places like Mid-South where you had crazy travel in WWE, did you find it hard to get good workouts in?
Well, with the heavy workouts, you couldn't anymore. But what was nice was the guys I hung around with, Bill, my partner, Tito Santana, Ron Bass, and believe it or not, Fuji always went to the gym too. So, but that was our life. When you were on the road, we didn't go out drinking and doing drugs and all that stuff all the time. We were on usually late at night wrestling close to the main event. And, usually the tag team was right before the main event, but a lot of times the main event went on before us and we'd be on last. So we'd get out of the building, a lot of times at 11 o'clock at night, and then you'd have a 4-hour drive back to wherever you had to go. And then you have to get an early flight. So we weren't getting much sleep, but what we did was as soon as we flew in to the town, we'd get a rental car and we'd immediately go to the gym, where a lot of guys would eat and do whatever they did. They'd try to get into the hotel, they'd sleep an hour or two, and then they'd go to the gym, and then they'd go to the building because you had to be at the building early. But we always thought, let's get the workout over with. And since we were doing light reps and we did a lot of cardio, as soon as we'd land, we get the car, go to the gym, boom, train, eat, do everything, and then we get to the hotel, and then we'd check in, and then we'd relax all day. So then we were ready for the building. And usually when we got to the building, we'd do more cardio at the building. And that's why I always thought that, um, Bill and I were, pretty good sized guys, but we never blew up in the ring. We could do our Broadways with people and, smaller, lighter guys, and we'd hang with them. And I think that's why we were so successful. We never blew up. We would try to blow the other guys up, and we'd laugh because here were these two big old guys, and but training was really good for the situation that we had, and every different situation you had to train a different situation. When you're on the road with no sleep, you had to go light, or you had to sleep before you trained, and when you went home, you tried to go a little heavier because you were getting sleep and you were eating right. But yeah, the key was a lot of cardio and a lot of light reps, and get a good pump and get the heck out of there.
And you were at Robbinsdale High School, as you mentioned, with I think that whole crew of wrestlers, which I think is the biggest crew of wrestlers that ever grew up together. Do you have any stories about going to high school with all of those guys?
Well, we were all in different grades and different ages. Um, uh, when we say we're all from Robbinsdale, some of us were from like Cooper, like Wayne was from. Some of us were from Irondale, like Animal was. Hawk was from Minneapolis. Um, we all we all say we're from Robbinsdale because we were all kind of in that within probably 5 miles of each other, and everybody has heard of each other or known of each other. Kurt Hennig was 2 years older in school than I was, and John Nord was a year older than me. Um, Wayne Bloom and I, we were in the same grade. Tom Zink, he was uh, a year ahead of me. Um, Brady Boone was 2 years ahead of me. Rick Rude was 2 years ahead of me. Uh, Animal and I were in the same grade. Um, and then you had Jesse Ventura, and you had Bob Backlund, and Scott Norton. He went to the same school that Hawk went to, and there's so many of us. You know we were all rivalries in high school, and what's funny was I was always in sports, and a lot of my buddies who we lifted weights with and everything weren't in sports, but they watched everything. So Wayne Bloom was at Cooper, and Robbinsdale and Cooper were the two biggest rivalries for Robbinsdale. Well, all of us used to fight those guys in high school. And a lot of times, like during the hockey season, you'd have the hockey game, and all of a sudden there'd be fights in the stands, and it'd be all my best friends were fighting each other. And, Wayne and his best friends, they were fighting each other. And, thank God I wasn't out with them. I was at the rink playing hockey because these guys would come to school and they'd have black eyes and this and that. But we all ended up becoming best friends, and half of them were the wrestlers. And then we'd always hear about the guys that are in Minneapolis. It's like there's rivalries, and Rick Rude would always say, "Hey, there's a couple of guys that were fighting up at the McDonald's in Robbinsdale." So then we'd meet these guys and end up being Hawk and his friends and Norton. So it was like we were always in the same group, but we weren't in the same group, and we didn't know that later on in life we were going to be best friends. And we all got into wrestling, and wrestling's just such a bond. We were best friends, and it's terrible that all these guys have died at such a young age. I mean, I look at my son. He's 33 years old, 34 years old, and he's got three kids, and all these guys have kids, and just what their kids are missing out with their grandfather and their dad is I mean, it's really sad, and I miss every one of these guys. It's just incredible.
How's John Nord holding up? Because last I heard, he was having a lot of issues and in and out of jail related to DUIs.
Who's that?
The Berserker John Nord.
Oh yeah, yeah, John Nord. He's always had those demons that gets him. And I'll tell you, out of all my friends, and I mean, they're all great guys. John Nord is probably one of the best hearted guys out of anybody. If you called up John and said, John, hey, I, I need, uh, I need a favor, whatever, he'd be the first one that was there, and that's how John was always. And growing up, John was just, you know, he was, I don't even know how to explain it. He was just this big old huge teddy bear guy, and it was funny because his whole family, they're all big people and strong people and everything. When you go over to their house, they had a dog named Satch that was a Saint Bernard that was huge. He was a Nord. But anyways, Johnny trained really hard, and one time we were at the gym. He says, "Hey Barry," he says, and this was before we got into wrestling. He says, "Barry," he says, "I just read this article on a back workout." And I said, "Yeah." He says, "Oh yeah, I can gain like 5 inches in my back in one day, you know." And we were laughing at him, and so he says, "Yeah, it's an 8 hour workout." So John was in there, and it was like every 10 minutes he had to do these pull-ups, and then he did that for like 2 hours, and then he'd do deadlifts, and then he'd do that. And dang it, when he was done, his back, he grew like 5, 6 inches on his back. And he had the biggest back that out of any of us guys. He could take and he'd do pull-ups behind his back with 100-pound plates between his legs. And then he'd come in and he'd say, "Hey, I got this way of gaining 3 inches on my arms in one day." And we'd all laugh. And he did. He'd measure them. And at the end of the workout, he had like 3 inches on his arms. He had, when we were in high school, we were just getting out of high school. His arms were bigger than Arnold Schwarzenegger's, and they looked better than Arnold. So Arnold Schwarzenegger was down in. He came to Minneapolis, and he was down at a place called Dayton's, and so Jim Younger and Nord and myself, and I think Bloom was there. We had about 5 or 6 of us, and we said, "Hey, let's go down and let's meet Arnold, and let's get your bicep out there and put the two biceps together." Well, Johnny pulled out his bicep, and Arnold went, "Holy shit!" And Arnold wouldn't take his arm out because at that time, Johnny's arm was bigger than Arnold's. It was huge. So, anyways, but back to later on. We always, partied heavy. Drank beer. And we were the good old boys. And John always had his demons with drinking, and and I'm sorry if I was maybe part of it, but I always had a drinking problem too. But I could quit. Johnny couldn't. And later on in the years, John, got a DWI, and then, he had other problems, and then another DWI, and it ended up being where, in Minnesota, you had, 3 strikes and you're out. And, I can't remember all the details of everything, but it ended up being where he went to jail. And, you know, he, uh, he was the greatest guy, like he always is. Even in jail, everybody loved him, and he ended up getting out of jail. And back in wrestling, he'd wrestle, he'd go out and party, and then pretty soon he'd go 6 months where he wouldn't drink anything. And it just, the demons always caught up with him and always got him into trouble. And but through all of it, he was still John Nord. He was just the greatest guy in the world.
And as far as Rick Rude, most people say he was the toughest of the whole Minnesota crew. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, everybody, I was never a tough guy, but everybody that we hung around with were not normal guys, you know. I mean, Johnny was an amateur wrestler too, and he was a big guy, and yeah, he was a real tough guy in his way. And you know, Rick Rude, you know, pound for pound, he was probably the toughest guy for his size. And you know, everybody was you know, tough guys, but some guys didn't want to fight, and other guys did want to fight. And you know, I don't know. You know, Johnny was a guy who didn't want to fight anybody, but if you fought him, you were in big trouble. Rick Rude, if you wanted to fight, he'd be the first. He'd throw the first punch. He loved it. Um, but yeah, John was one of the tougher guys, but he was, you know, the bigger guy out of all of us too.
Were you in Mid South when John had that altercation with Butch Reed?
What's that?
Were you in Mid South Wrestling when John had that backstage fight with Butch Reed?
No, I was already gone. I was already probably in Florida or something like that when all that happened, and I didn't even really hear the details. When I was wrestling all the different territories and everything, I kind of lost touch with everybody, unless we were in the territories. And you know, every once I'd come home to see everybody, then they were gone on the road somewhere. So you know, I didn't really keep up on all that stuff. And I was friends with Butch Reed and John, and I believe John and Butch were good friends after that.
Yeah, that's what I heard too. It was just, I think Bill Watts kind of egged them on.
Yeah, you know, and yeah, and you know, everybody wants to you know, the testosterone's running high, and everybody wants to be on top. And Bill would egg those things on, and I'm sure if they weren't there, they probably wouldn't have fought, because both these guys are great guys to be around.
And as far as your first territory, sorry, the first territory that you worked, I understand was Hawaii.
Yep, yep,
Could you
yeah.
tell us some details about that and your gimmick there?
Yep, definitely. Um, when we were in Eddie Sharkey's camp, um, there was you know, it was the Road Warriors, Rick Rude, and myself, and we were at the end of the camp to where we needed to start working. And the first one out of the camp was Joe. Um, and what had happened was Eddie Sharkey was very good friends with uh, I lose my mind anyways, with Ole Anderson. And Ole used to come down to the camp, and Ole was the booker down in Atlanta. And he came down and he took Joe first. He liked Joe's look, and he brought him in, and he went down to North Carolina. And one of his first matches was with Johnny Weaver. And back then, Johnny Weaver, you know, I suppose Johnny was in his 50s back then and wasn't a very big guy, but Johnny Weaver had the sleeper hold down there. So now Joe's coming out of camp at, you know, 260 pounds, in shape, strong as heck. And they put this, you know, kind of a halfway biker look on him. And he went down there and had a match with Johnny Weaver, and Johnny Weaver beat him with the sleeper hold. So that was the first time, you know, Joe comes back to the camp and says, "Guys, this was the most brutal time I ever had." He says, "I got beat by Johnny Weaver, you know," and we're all kind of laughing with the sleeper hold. Well, Eddie Sharkey really never smartened us up on what was going on in the wrestling world. So we're thinking that, you know, here was four tough guys. We're going to get out there and we're going to tear this business up. Well, you know, you got your, you know, you start off by doing jobs for everybody, and that's just the way it is. And then when you prove yourself, then maybe you move up to the next level, and maybe you can beat a couple of people and this and that. And but what, you know, the whole thing was Ole wanted to see Joe in the ring and to see if Joe would do business, and Joe did business. So now Ole is thinking, well, hey, these guys, they're four big monsters that are going to get in the business, and now they're going to do business. These might be some guys that we're going to get in the business and we're going to push. So um, the next guy that came out of the camp was Hawk, and Animal and Hawk became the Road Warriors. Well, Ole watched the Road Warrior movie and says, "Hey, these guys they got the look. We're going to put this gimmick on them. They can't really work a lick because we didn't learn. I mean, we could do arm drags and this and that, but when you're at that time of the era of wrestling, there wasn't guys that were our size, 270, 280, that can take bumps and get up, and there was a few guys, but it was more, the Crusher, the Bruiser, Larry the Axe Hennig was a big, strong guy, but he wasn't the guy that would take bumps, and so we were like that. And so Ole, when he created the Road Warriors, he said, I need to put you with the guy who is smart as heck, and that was Paul Ellering. And Paul showed them, you're just going to mow through everybody. You ain't working with nobody, and eventually you're going to get over. Well, while this was happening, Ole was looking for a spot for me, and he was looking for a spot for Rick Rude. Well, Rick and I got together and said, hey, let's go out and let's just call some promoters and see what we can do on our own, and let's have Ole, can call us when something opens up, because the Atlanta territory was a big territory. So Rick called up Al Tomko or whatever up in Canada, and I called up Stu Hart up in Canada, in Calgary, and Eddie told me, he says, here's his number, and Stu's a great guy, and he'd be a good guy for you to go to in that territory. He says, because in Canada, they had a lot of big guys, and you'd be perfect up there. And he says, and then you can go through his camp and learn the other stuff that you're not learning here, and those guys are in order to work out perfect. So I I called up Stu Hart's house, and I didn't know this at the time, but Dean Hart was Brett's brother, and Dean Hart, he was a heck of a ribber. Well, he made like he was Stu Hart, and I was talking to Dean, thinking he was Stu, and he was asking everything about me, and I like the story I just said. And he says, "Well, hey, I got some openings in Honolulu, Hawaii. There's a big show coming up at the Blaisdell," and he says, "I work with Liam Maivia," and he says, "I can't guarantee anything, but it's a great territory, and why don't you go out there and start out there?" So I said, "You know what?" I'm thinking to myself, hey, what a great place to start. Honolulu, Hawaii. I've never been there. Um, I could quit the bar anytime, and I can get a bouncing job out there if I have to. I can just stay and live out there for a month or two and see what happens. So, anyways, I talked to my mom. I said, "Mom, I need to borrow a couple of $1,000." And right away, my mom is the greatest person in the world. She gives me the money. I buy a ticket. Stu Hart gives me this address to go to. He says, "Go right to this address, and um, there'll be a van there waiting for you." So I go out there and land in Hawaii. It's gorgeous. I get there, like 10 o'clock in the morning, and I'm waiting for this van at this address, and there's no van that comes there or anything. And he says to me, he says, "And if nobody goes there, go over to the YMCA." He says, "That's where all the guys are." So I go to the YMCA in Honolulu, and I thought, well, shoot, what a place. I'm going to train. I'm going to, see what's going on. And anyways, so I'm training there, and all of a sudden I see this guy come in, and it's Mark Lewin. And I remember Mark Lewin from TV, and I go over and I say, "Hey, Mark," I said, "my name is Barry Darsow. I'm from Minneapolis." I said, I came into town to wrestle at the Blaisdell, and I said, nobody picked me up over there. And he says to me, he goes, "Well, shoot, the Blaisdell isn't up. The show ain't for 2 more months, almost 3 months away." So he says, "Who'd you talk to?" And I said, "I talked to Stu." And he said, "You sure you talked to Stu?" And I said, "Oh, I think so." So this whole time I'm thinking I talked to Stu Hart. Well, anyways, I got to be friends with Mark Lewin, and I got an apartment there, and I trained every day with Mark Lewin. And he says, "Hey, we got a trip to Tonga and Samoa, and we're going to go to New Zealand." He says, "You want to get on that tour?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "But I've never had a real match in front of people." And he says, "Well, this is the perfect one to go on." So um, we end up trying to figure out a gimmick for me. And he says to me, he goes, I got to go over to Ripper Collins's house tonight. He's really good with figuring out gimmicks. And he says, and I'll introduce you to Liam Ivia and all this stuff. So, anyways, by this time now I got a tan, everything. He says, we're going to shave your head and you're going to get a little ponytail. And he says, you got any buddies? And I said, yeah. I said, I got a good friend of mine that I've been talking to that wants to fly in. So I flew in another one of my friends, and we were the Mongols. And he was Zeke Mongo, and I was Czar Mongo. And our first trip was to Tonga, and we wrestled in Tonga, and then American Samoa, and then we came back, and then we went to New Zealand, and then that's when uh, I started really kind of learning how to wrestle, and then we ended up coming back for the Blaisdell show. Well, they ended up putting the tag team titles on me and my partner, and the Blaisdell was sold out. And on these trips to Tonga and Samoa and all them, we got paid like $50 a shot. It was. I mean, we were starving to death. So we were guaranteed like $1,500 a piece at the Blaisdell. Well, at this time, I learned. I said, Mrs. Maivia, I need my money ahead of time before the match. I'm flying out tomorrow morning, and she says, "Well, after the show, I'll give you the money." Well, I've learned that she didn't pay a lot of the people a lot of the times. So it ended up being where me and my partner, we just ended up getting we were getting in a early plane that night, and we were going to leave before the match. Well, the word got out that we skipped the show, so then they were going to hire their hit squad on us. So we ended up, Mark Lewin uh, took us over to his place, and we ended up staying for a couple of days because they were waiting for us at the airport and everything. We ended up catching a plane and we took off. So then Mrs. Maivia called me at my mom's house and said, "Barry, I can't believe you left." And I said, "Well, you didn't pay us on the other ones. You weren't going to pay us on this one. Why were we going to do it?" Well, it ended up being Mrs. Maivia. We ended up becoming really good friends. So I flew back to Hawaii and ended up doing a few more shots there. And then I had a guarantee in New Zealand. They got me and back then, just being new to the business, I had a $600 American dollar a week pay in New Zealand, which was huge because the money there and the dollar, it was like I was a millionaire back then. And then Ric Flair came in, and I met Rick at the airport before in Minneapolis, but it ended up being where I traveled with Rick all over New Zealand, and we became really good friends there. And then Rick opened some doors for me, and between Rick and Mark Lewin, they started making some calls for me, and then I ended up calling Dusty Rhodes, and so that was my Honolulu trip, which all comes down to I got in the business and it was a rib, and I I just put the boots to Dean Hart for so many years, but then later on I called up Dean and I said, "Dean, that was the greatest thing that ever happened. What a great rib. I ended up getting in the business because of you." And Brett and I laugh about it, and it's terrible that Dean passed away quite a few years ago too. But I always tell Brett, your brother is the one that got me in the business.
That is a terrible rib to play on someone, though. You're lucky that you took it and you made the best out of it.
Well, and I always knew, you can't count on anybody, but you can count on yourself. And I just thought, if nothing comes to this, I'm going to have the greatest time in Honolulu, Hawaii. I'm going to train. I'm going to do what I always do. You being a lifter, nothing else matters, but let's go to the gym and let's train. And then, you got to eat. So I had enough money for a couple of months out there. I knew I could train and eat, and I could be in Honolulu, Hawaii, and I, rented bicycles and I biked all over the island. I swam in lagoons. I did it all. I mean, if I didn't get in the business, I still had one hell of a time. And, I would have probably stayed there and power lifted with Mark Lewin and all these guys.
And as far as hanging out with Ric Flair, was he as wild as people say he is?
He was wilder. He Rick was Ric Flair. He was the gimmick that you see on TV. That was really Ric Flair, and I have to thank him for so many different ways that he's helped me out. And when he was in, his job in the wrestling business was, he was the champion, and he went into every different territory, and he was the top guy, and the top guy in the territory would wrestle Ric Flair, and Ric Flair would make that person look like $1 million. And Rick would walk out with the belt, and he would make the guy who he wrestled a better wrestler and more over in that territory. And when we were in New Zealand, I really learned that from Rick, because Rick was there working with Lars Anderson, who was the booker, and he was the top guy in that little territory around there. And they had matches that were just incredible. And I would ride with Rick. It was just me and Rick. We'd rent a car. He was there for about 2 weeks. So we hit every city everywhere. And I learned so much about the business from Rick. And when he left, he gives me his home phone number. Back then you didn't have cell numbers. So, and he'd always say, hey, and he actually had me talking to his wife because she was from Minnesota and I was from Minnesota. So I could always get a hold of him through that. And he said, Barry, please, if you need something, you call me. Any questions or anything, you're a good guy. And that's how it was. So after when I left Hawaii and New Zealand that second time, I called up Dusty Rhodes, and Dusty says, hey, why don't you fly down here to Florida? And at that time, Tampa, Florida territory was on fire. It was incredible. And he says, come on down, let me meet you. He says, I've talked to Rick, and Rick has mentioned your name. He says that, you're big, you got a great attitude. He says, you haven't really learned how to work yet. And he says, but maybe I can use you down here. And so I ended up flying to Hawaii, to Minneapolis for about 2-3 days, and I flew right to Tampa. And it was kind of that same thing. You don't have a contract where you have money or anything, but I made some money, and I saved some money, and I was paying back my mom already. But then I called up Mom. I said, Mom, I gotta have some money again, So I ended up paying for my own ticket again. I had the money. I flew into Tampa. I met with Dusty at the office, and he says, hey, why don't you come down to, I can't remember what the building was, but we ended up, it was the Armory or something in Tampa. So I ended up going down there, and I met all the guys there, sellout crowd. And Dusty says, this is what it's like, Barry, baby, And he says, I don't have anything right now for you, but he says, why don't you go to the gym, meet the guys and everything. And he says, we'll get you in some of the small shows around the state. And he says, we'll get you going. So I was training there again. I had a couple of great friends down there I met at the gym, and we were training. I had an apartment down there. And Dusty calls me up. He says, Barry, he says, I don't have anything for you right here. He says, it's going to be about 2 months. He says, if you want to wait, you can. But he says, I got a call from Ole. He says, and Ole knows you from the camp. He says, if you want to drive to Atlanta, he's got shots for you right away. And I said to Dusty, Dusty, what do I do? And he says, I think you ought to go with Ole. And then I called up Rick, and I said, Rick, what do I do? He goes, oh, go with Ole. He says, I'll call Ole. So he called up Ole, and then about 3 days later, I was in Atlanta, and right away Ole says, good to see you again. He says Rick called me up and had some really good things to say about you, and he says I got a shot at. I want you to wrestle. You and Stan Hansen are partners, and you're going to go against the Road Warriors in about 2 weeks. He says at the Omni, and I'm thinking to myself, holy shit, the Omni, that holds about 30, 40,000 people. I don't even know how to wrestle. I wrestled in Samoa and Tonga and New Zealand, and after seeing these guys out there, reality sets in. But then I'm thinking, well, if the Road Warriors can do it, I can do it. So Ole says, we got to put a gimmick on you. He says, your new name is Man Mountain Darsow. So he put me in these jeans and a flannel shirt, and I carried an axe around. And he says, and you're from Minnesota. And, Ole had a sawmill and all that stuff. So he was pretty proud of that gimmick on me. And he had me work a couple of shots in a couple of towns, and I did pretty good. And then it ended up being the Omni. And I look out there, and it's a sellout crowd. I'm in like the semi-main event with the Road Warriors, Stan Hansen, and myself in a tag match. And Paul Ellering's in the corner, and I look at Stan Hansen. I said, Stan, what do you want me to do? He says, hit everybody with that axe but me. So I said, well, I could do that. He says, no. He said, this is going to be an awful quick one. He says, you come in that axe, or you come in with that axe. The Road Warriors are the heels, we're the baby faces. I'm going to come in doing my, all the stuff he does. You come in and swing the axe and don't hit me, and they're going to hit the skids. And he says they're going to take off running, and we're going to be chasing them, and that's the end of the match. I said, that's the greatest match of all. He goes, remember this one, because he says they ain't going to be like this anymore. So that was my deal. They just had me in there for a second to chase them out of the ring, and the Road Warriors took off, and later on, that was for an angle that they were doing in Japan later on. So it was just good to be part of that. But then after that match, I worked a few shows there, and then Ole says, I talked to Bill Watts, and he says, I got a full-time job for you down with Bill Watts. He says, you're going to learn how to wrestle. And so from that time, I left there. I probably had about 5 or 6 more matches. And then from there, I ended up driving down to Louisiana and met with Bill Watts. So that was all because of Ric Flair. And then, through my life, I was around Rick quite a bit, but Rick really helped me out.
So Bill Watts would have been when you got the Russian gimmick then for the first time. Oh, can you hear me now?
Can you repeat that? You're breaking up. Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay. So when you were working for Bill Watts, he was the one that had the idea to put the Russian gimmick on you, I assume.
Yep. When I left Atlanta, I was Man Mountain Darsow, and I went down to Louisiana, and I couldn't do an interview at all. I could wrestle, but I wasn't a good wrestler. So Bill Watts ended up. He says, Barry. He says, I want you to really learn down here. He says, you got a hell of a body on you. You're a big young guy. He says, you're a good looking baby face, and we got to really figure this out. So he had me with Art Cruz and George Weingroff, and they ended up training with me before all the matches all the time, and really taught me a lot. And then Lanny Poffo came down, and then Lanny Poffo taught me a lot of, how to work like not a big 320-pound guy. Because at this time, now I'm a 300-pound old power lifter that I was in shape too at 300, but I was still lifting, pretty heavy. And so they taught me how to wrestle with more people. And I started learning how to wrestle more like a smaller wrestler, a quicker wrestler, learned a lot of those moves. So then I could end up working with everybody and have more stuff to do in the ring. So I ended up having, a lot of matches with those guys, Art Cruz and George Weingroff, in front of people, and I really got comfortable now. So then they had me do some interviews, and I look back at the interviews and I go, "Ah, what a slug he was back then," because it was really hard for me to be Barry Darsow or be a babyface guy, and I don't know if it was back from you know when I was a kid. I was so good at sports, I never liked to brag, and I always felt like when I was doing these interviews, and still right now I feel kind of strange talking about, hey, I was a champion three. But I've learned that that's just what it is. So I had a hard time, and Jim Ross was phenomenal. He was the announcer down there, and he'd pull me aside and say, "Hey Barry, just talk normal, and you don't have to be excited and all that." And I just thought, God, that was really nerdy. I mean, I just sounded like a goofball, and so I do these interviews, and they'd help me and everything. And finally, Bill Watts came up and he says, "Barry," he says, this Man Mountain Darsow just ain't working. He says, "How do you feel about being a heel?" I said, "Thank God, make me a heel, because now I can work. I can beat up these smaller guys. I can, have them make a comeback on me, because I knew how to be a heel. That's what I was at Eddie Sharkey's camp. That's where I was in New Zealand and all that. So then now I felt a little comfortable." He says, "Yeah, but what are you going to do with me?" He says, "How do you feel about being a turncoat?" I said, "Turncoat?" He says, "Yeah, you're going to be a Russian sympathizer. You're going to be a guy from Minnesota who turns on America. You hate America, and you're going to take this red shovel and you're going to bury all Americans, and you're going to do everything you can to help Nikolai Volkov, because Nikolai is the greatest human being in America." And I looked at Bill Watts and I said, "You know what? I like that idea." So he says, "We're going to name you Crusher Khrushchev, and you're a Russian sympathizer." And I said, "Great." So now I'm trying to figure out, how I need to do this. And then Nikolai, he says, "Barry," he says, "you just be that guy from Minnesota. Just be mean and just say "niet, niet," and agree with me. And we're going to make you the biggest heel in the whole United States." Because at that time, Russia and America, it was tough, and in those days, everybody believed wrestling. It was the real thing. There was no fake, no phony, no nothing. Whatever you did in there, that was real, and especially being down south. So I ended up doing a couple of interviews that, were easy, because Nikolai did all the talking, and I just agreed, and yet, and all this stuff. So one of my first angles was with Terry Taylor, and Terry Taylor back then, he helped me out a lot too. Terry was a great guy, and whatever was best for the match, that's what Terry Taylor was. And Terry Taylor was a hell of a worker. And down there, he was a big time babyface. So for me to go against Terry Taylor, that was a step up. Now I'm in the middle of the card instead of just, the first 2, 3 matches. Now I'm all of a sudden, being something. So Bill says, "We're going to put some heat on you, and it's going to be ugly for you." But he says, "Are you ready for it?" I said, "You do whatever you want." So we ended up doing a deal where I had a match, or it ended up being Nikolai had a match with Terry Taylor, and Nikolai threw a rope around his neck, threw him over the top rope, and was hanging him. And we were in Alexandria, Louisiana, and I was outside, and I was punching Terry in the stomach while he was hanging from the rope over the top rope. Now, this was one unbelievable angle for being down there. They wanted to kill us. So I'm punching Terry, and Nikolai looks at me and he goes, "Knife." Well, a guy was coming to stab me in the back. I jumped out of the way. The guy took the knife and he cut the rope off of Terry Taylor, and he took a swipe at Nikolai and cut the laces off his boots. I took off running around the end and helped pull Nikolai out of the ring to get him out of there. We got out of the ring. The cops grabbed the guy. We ended up getting escorted. Terry sold this thing like a son of a gun. And from that day on, that was on film. It'd be great to see that. Um, I was the biggest heel ever. And by me doing that, that ended up making Nikolai be more of a heel. And we ended up being a tag team then. So now I had the help from Nikolai. We'd wrestle Terry Taylor and whoever else. I got help. It was like all my life I had people helping me out, and that's why I tried to always help people out if I could. But um, that's where I became Crusher Khrushchev down in Louisiana, and what a great territory! I really learned how to work down there, and uh, by the time I left there, I could call myself a professional wrestler now. Finally, I wasn't scared to go anywhere or wrestle anybody.
Was that knife incident the worst fan attack situation you've ever been in?
Oh no, no. I've had uh, I've had quite a few. Um, you know, down in that territory, you know, it seemed like every baby face we wrestled, something would end up happening, and it was Nikolai, myself, Butch Reed, and Jim the Animal Neidhart. We traveled together everywhere, and every night down there, it was always a heat finish, and you know, as a heel, Bill Watts knew that the heels are what made the people come out to see the match because they wanted the baby face to beat the crap out of the heels. And when I first got there, they had some pretty good crowds and everything. But by the time all this was going on, probably a year, half a year to three quarters of a year. By the time all this was going on, now they were selling out every building everywhere. So there, one of the scariest times for me, I suppose, in this business was, um, oh God, there was quite a few of them, but there was one night, me and Hacksaw Jim Duggan, we had a match in, and like I say, my memory isn't like it used to be, but we were in Oklahoma City, and we had a coal miner's glove match, and we were having a heck of a match, and it ended up being where Jim Duggan had me down, and he was climbing up this pole to get the coal miner glove, and he was almost to the glove, and Nikolai came down and pulled his leg down, and when he pulled his leg down, he couldn't get the glove. So then Nikolai, both of us started putting the boots to Duggan, and Nikolai hooked him from behind. And he says to me, because everything at that point was I listened to Nikolai. So Nikolai says, "Go get the glove." So now I'm climbing the pole to get the glove, and people were throwing beers and bottles and everything because Duggan was going to beat me up and win the match, and it was my match, was the coal miner's glove match. So he's going to beat me at my own match. So I get up there, I get the glove, I put the glove on, and I'm getting ready to hit Duggan with this glove. And the cop outside, and you can feel when a riot's ready to start happening. And in that building, there was the main floor, and then there was a balcony, and the balcony was probably, 12 to 14 feet up in the air, and then there was a railing, and this place is sold out. Well, the cop, he stands up, and I'm looking at this cop, and he's a pretty good sized cop, and I'm thinking to myself, what is this guy doing? And I just happened to catch him out of my corner of my eye. And I took the glove, and it had a big steel hinge on the front of the glove. And I nailed Duggan right in the head, and boom, blood starts coming out. And I'm hitting Duggan. And Nikolai puts him down. Well, this cop, he takes this chair that he's sitting on, and he slides it in the ring. And I thought, well, this is great. I get the chair, and I start nailing Duggan with it. Well, the crowd is so pissed at the cop for giving us the chair. The whole crowd starts jumping on the cop, and they're putting the boots to the cop. Then they start coming in the ring. I said, Nikolai, we got to get the heck out of here. And he goes, you're right. And I ended up where the whole crowd, people from the balconies were jumping off the balconies coming at us. And Bill Watts's rule was always everybody stays to the end to help everybody out. Well, now the guys from the dressing room are coming out. We're hooking and jabbing and putting the boots to all these people, fans trying to get us. And the only thing I thought of is if we don't get out of here and somebody, leg dives us or knocks us down, we're dead. They're going to kill us. Because they believed that we did that to Duggan, and Duggan laid there. And with the guys' help in the back and us, we ended up getting out of the building. And that was probably one of the hairy moments. But there was quite a few of those. But to me, that one was probably the one that could have went bad fast.
I know it's a different time now, but for any wrestlers watching, do you have any advice for being a good heel?
Well, things have changed so much now, but I think it all goes back to, you got to do things that fans emotionally are going to connect with. And now it's pretty hard because everybody's smarting up to the business, and it's entertainment, and they know that you're a bad guy and the other guy's a good guy, so they know they got to boo for you or cheer for you. But if somehow you can do something that gets to their emotions to where they really hate you in real life, and it's not cheap heat. It's not like you go to some old lady in the front row and say, hey, you're an old lady, you old bag. That's cheap heat. It's almost, I mean, it's really tough, but it goes back to the old school. You got to start off by, the bad guy, takes the baby face down, the baby face reverses it, gets on top. You just keep doing things, and the baby face is better than you, so you got to cheat. And when you cheat, you pull the hair, you do moves like that, and you end up, you got to kind of figure out, and everybody's different how they work and everything, but you have to figure out while you're doing that, you have to make it look so real and so good that the people really know you are a bad guy. And if they really know you are a bad guy, and you create that persona all the time, and now it's a little harder. You got to do it on the internet, and you got to do it on videos, and you got to do it in front of people. You have to act like that all the time. I think one of the worst things now is the heels. Now you have your match, and then during intermission you go out and you sell pictures and all this. You have to kind of bite the bullet and go, hey, I'm a heel, and you got to be a heel all the time. And eventually the people, when you walk out there, they're going to boo you, and not boo you just because you're a heel. They're going to boo you because they really do hate you. This guy really doesn't sign autographs for me. He really isn't a very good guy. And that's kind of, my whole career as being a heel. I never went outside and talked to people, never went in the same dressing room as the baby faces, never went to bars the same as people. It was a very serious thing to kayfabe everybody, but that was really what people believed in you. They said this guy really is a real a-hole, and it was hard for me because I'm not. I think I'm a pretty nice guy, but I played it like I was a bad guy all the time, and that's what the young guys have to be able to do. And it's hard when a baby face is out there selling pictures and making all the money in picture money, and then you're the heel sitting there and going, "Oh, what the heck? This ain't fair." Well, no, it's not fair, but you want to be a heel because you want to be a heel, so you got to be a heel.
And you went to Crockett Promotions with a big push again with the Russian gimmick. Could you tell us about how you got down there and some of your memories of working for them, which was affiliated with NWA?
Yeah, I'll tell you when I was leaving Watts' territory down there in Mid-South, Bill set me up with Eddie Graham down in Florida Championship Wrestling, and you know, um, and like I was saying before, I really believe that now I was a wrestler. So when I got to Florida Championship Wrestling, it was a great territory. You were home pretty much every night if you wanted to be, and some nights you didn't want to be. Like whenever you travel to Miami, which was 250 some miles away, you'd wrestle there and then you'd stay there and come back the next day and then go to the town. I mean, it was such a nice deal, and we made some really good money down there. But I got down there, and Eddie Graham pulled me in his office and says, "Hey Barry, I've heard nothing but good things from you. What are you thinking? You want to do down here? I got some ideas." And I said, "Yeah, I'd like to become partners with Jim the Anvil Neidhart because Jim was down there." And he says, "Well, you're a Russian." And I says, "Well, why don't we do the same thing that we did in Mid-South?" I said, "Now I'm the real Russian, even though I was a Russian sympathizer, but the people down here know that I'm Crusher Khrushchev." I said, "Why don't I get a partner? And I need a big badass partner." And I said, "Why don't we have Jim the Anvil Neidhart, who is just doing single matches and you're not doing really nothing with them? Why don't we become a tag team?" And he used to be partners with Butch Reed. So if people, were reading the magazines or if word got out, there's some kind of a partnership already. And everybody knew down there that we traveled together and we were friends. And I had a beard, and Jim didn't have a beard. So I said, "We'll get Jim to grow his Billy Goat's gruff beard." And I said, "He's going to be the Russian sympathizer. He's going to say that, all these American people, I don't like them because they don't like me, and he doesn't have to be a full Russian, but that'll rub off on him and we'll get instant heat." And Eddie Graham says to me, he goes, "Barry, that's a hell of an idea." And he says to me, he goes, "Well, you know, I don't exactly know what kind of a guarantee you're thinking you're going to make here, but," he says, "you're not the main event." And he says, "I can't pay you top dollar." I said, "Well, how about we do this? I'm going to be the main event as soon as we get over, which I know we're going to get over. So instead of paying me, not a whole lot of money, and don't pay me main event money right now, but why don't you pay me almost main event money? And then when I'm main event, you don't have to pay me that money." He looked at me and he goes, "That's a hell of an idea." And I said, "All right, what are most of the guarantees around here?" He says, "Well, the top guarantee is $1,500. And he says, you're home every night. You hardly have any expenses. You share cars." And I'm thinking to myself, that's a hell of a payday back then. And, you got an apartment or whatever you do, and you split trans with people. And I said, you're going to end up with, after taxes, a grand a week. And I thought, that's pretty good. So anyways, I said, "All right, you're on, let's do it." So he says, "Well, you want to call Jim first, and then we'll bring him in the office next Tuesday, and you guys will be partners at TV." So I said, "Yeah, let's do it." So I called up Jim. I said, "Hey, Jim," I said, "you want to be partners?" He goes, "Yeah, let's do it." He says, "I'm just stuck in nowhere land here." And I says, there's good news and bad news. You're going to be a Russian. He goes, Jesus, I ain't going to be a Russian sympathizer. I said, you are. I'm the Nikolai Volkov now. I'm the Crusher Khrushchev. You're the Russian sympathizer. He says, yeah, but I hate Russians. I said, that's all right. You just got to hate Americans, just like me. And we laughed, and I says, but you got to grow out a Billy Goat's gruff. Can you do that by next Tuesday? He says, I can have the start of this thing. I said, well, start it. So anyways, we ended up being partners, and we were missing one piece of the puzzle, and we needed a manager. So we ended up David Sierra. He was the Cuban assassin. I went to Eddie Graham and said, hey, we need the Cuban assassin for our manager, and it'll be just perfect, a Cuban, a Russian, and an American that hates it. So it ended up being the Cuban assassin was our manager, which it turned out unbelievable. We had heat all over again, and pretty soon we were main events everywhere. And I learned so much from Ric Flair, from Bill Watts, from Duggan, from the Junkyard Dog, from George Weingroff and Ole and Terry Taylor. I sucked up everything that they taught me, and that's why I learned those angles. And then it ended up being Michael Hayes came in, and he was the booker, and we ended up working with those guys, and in cage matches, and we made nothing but money. And then Ric Flair used to come in, so I was kind of getting to where I was kind of at the end of my run, because we had all the heat and everything, and we were at the stage of starting to put over the baby faces. So the Freebirds, we ended up doing jobs for those guys, and we just the cycle goes like this. So when Rick was in one day, it was me and Rick and Harley Race. I was driving these guys around, and we were wrestling a couple of towns, and Rick says, Barry, he says, you got to come to the Charlotte territory. He says, it's flat on its nose, and when this thing gets good, it's going to be good. And he says, you need to come there. And I said, yeah, but I hate to leave here. And, I'm partners with Jim. And he says, everybody's going to end up coming to Charlotte. And he says, you want to be one of the first guys. And I said, well, and then I don't want to, leave Eddie Graham. He's done a lot for me, and he's a great guy. And he says, well, you think about it. He says, Dusty. He says, I've already talked to Dusty for you. He says, you give him a call. You come in whenever you want to come in. He says, right now they're going to have a guy come in from Minnesota, Scott Simpson, Nikita Koloff, and they want you to be partners with him and Ivan. And then you can help teach Nikita, and Ivan can help him. You can have 6 man. He says, it's just going to be a good fit. And he says, I said, what kind of money can I make? He says, well, you're going to start off not making a lot of money, but he says, you work out that deal, but he says, you're going to end up making a lot of money. So I says, yeah, but right now I'm home every day. I'm making money and all this stuff. Well, it ended up saying, well, Rick, I'll give Dusty a call anyways. It'll be a couple weeks before I do, though. I said, don't tell him, but I don't want to be in any rush that I want to leave, because I really don't. So it ended up being where we were working, and then Eddie Graham ended up passing. He committed suicide, or something happened to him. He died there, and Eddie was a great guy to me, and it was tough. And then Mike Graham, I was good friends with Mike, and things were really changing after that. So I went to Mike and I said, Mike, I'm going to put my notice in here. He says, it's just, I got an opportunity. He goes, I know they want you up there. He says, I want you to go too. He says, I'm not going to be able to treat you like you're going to want it to be, and I got to cut your money. And he says, I don't blame you. And he says, good luck, and, all that stuff. And, we were friends. And I told Jim, I said, Jim, you got to get out of here too. He says, it's changed. He goes, yep, I know. So it ended up being where we broke up there. And I called Dusty. I said, Dusty, I talked to Rick, and Rick told me to give you a call. He says, here's what I'm going to do. He says, you come up here, He says, I'll pay you $500 a week. He says, you're going to be working your tail off. He says, we got some long trips, all that. He says, it's not much money. He says, if you hook up with somebody, you make yourself $100 a week or something. And, when it's all said and done, he says, but we're going to pop this territory and you're going to be one of the top guys and you're going to make great money. And I can't guarantee anything, but I'm just telling you, you're going to make it. And he says, when this territory was going before, the guys were all making big money. And I said, I heard. I said, Rick told me the same thing. He says, I told him, I said, Dusty, you've helped me out a lot. And I said, I know this is going to be something that you want. And I says, I'll be there when you need me. He says, well, I want you here tomorrow. And I said, it's going to take a couple of days, He says, yeah, just come in within the week. And he says, call your buddy Scott Simpson. And he says, go to the apartment where he's at. And right now he's not speaking any English. He's only speaking Russian. He's a real Russian. And I said, I've heard, So I ended up going to Charlotte. I was Crusher Khrushchev. And Nikita was already now working. He probably had quite a few matches, and he was actually doing really well. But he was like I was when I went to Louisiana. I thought I was a pro wrestler, but I wasn't until I got in the ring, and I thought, I wasn't a pro wrestler yet. And after Louisiana, I thought, well, now I'm a pro wrestler. Well, I got to Florida, and I thought, well, I haven't even, I call myself a pro wrestler, but I'm not a really good one yet. But then now I'm thinking, well, now I'm pretty good. I get down here, and it's the same thing. You learn all the time from all the different people and the different territories you're at. So we ended up being, Ivan Koloff, Nikita Koloff, and Crusher Khrushchev. And Ivan Koloff, what a worker he was. I learned so much from him, and Nikita did. And then I helped Nikita as much as I could. And it ended up being where, Ivan and I ended up being the tag team. And then Nikita was doing single matches. Nikita was doing phenomenal. But he wasn't the worker. He was the big Russian sympathizer. He didn't speak English. He ended up changing his name really to Nikita Koloff. He did the gimmick to the T. He was, and I got to really look up to Nikita for doing that because he took this business so serious. The people believed it, and they believed he was a real Russian. Him and I used to go to the bank, and I made like I could understand Russian, but he could only talk Russian. So we'd go to the bank, and I'd talk to the teller, and I'd say, yeah, this is Nikita Koloff. He can't speak English. I can understand to translate a little bit. Is there something that he needs to know? And I was kind of like the translator for him. And he was unbelievable. So it ended up being where he ended up becoming a heck of a worker after he started working with different people who could really work. So that's how I ended up being Crusher Khrushchev in that territory.
And you feuded with the Rock and Roll Express quite a bit there. Could you share some memories of working with them?
Yes, definitely. When we were in Mid-South wrestling with Bill Watts, that's when I first met the Rock and Roll Express. And there were a couple of young guys in the business. They were in Memphis and the Tennessee territory and all that, and these guys could work. But they were smaller guys. They were young guys where all the girls loved these guys. And when I became Crusher Khrushchev down there, Bill Watts was smart enough to say, hey, Nikolai and Crusher Khrushchev, I want you guys to work with the Rock and Roll Express. And back then, we both kind of had the big man complex. It's like, how could you work with these little guys when we're this big and, we're not going to fly around for them. And, that was the attitude you kind of had, but it was the wrong attitude. Bill Watts taught us that you act like the big guys, but when it's time for the smaller guys to make that comeback, you fly for them. He always taught me, put these guys over big time, because then that makes you a better heel. I mean, he had the philosophy. So we had matches with the Rock and Roll Express that were just incredible, and it got us over even bigger and got them over bigger. And then they ended up working with the Midnight Express, and now all of a sudden the Rock and Roll Express were over so big it was easier for the Midnight Express. I mean, it all balloons, and what a territory that was. So, anyways, back to the Rock and Roll Express in Mid-South. So Ivan and I were doing tag matches with everybody, and we were establishing ourselves as a really good tag team, and we ended up winning the titles there, and they had the U.S. titles, and then they had the world titles. So I can't remember which one it was, but we had the titles, and we were going around, and I remember Dusty pulled me aside and Ivan, and he said, "Hey, I want you guys to have a title match with somebody, and I want you to have some unbelievable matches. Who would be the guys that you want to work with?" And I told Ivan about the matches that we had with the Rock and Roll Express, and Ivan knew the Rock and Roll, but didn't know him. He knew him but didn't know him. And I told Dusty, I said, "Dusty, I think we should have matches with the Rock and Roll Express, and I think they should take the titles from us." And he looked at me and he goes, "Oh, you want to lose the titles?" And I said, "Well, I think we need to lose the titles, and we need to win them back." But I said, they're new in the territory, and I don't know exactly if it went this way, but it's kind of what I'm remembering. We ended up working matches with the Rock and Roll Express all over the territory. We had our Broadways with them. So it was me and Ivan against the Rock and Roll Express. We'd have, in every town, we'd wrestle them. It was an hour match, and then it was a draw. And then we'd have matches where right before the draw, we'd cheat and win. And then there'd be riots. And I mean, we'd have a hard time getting out of the building. And I remember one night we were in Washington, D.C., and it was a sellout crowd. And we were against the Rock and Roll Express. And it was like a 45-minute match. And it ended up being where the Rock and Roll Express had a big comeback on us, and they were going to beat us. And they were going to beat me, and Ivan somehow came with a gimmick and knocked him out, and we won the match and walked out with the titles. And the whole crowd is one of those deals again. They were ready to kill us. And we were walking out of the ring, and the lights were shining right on us. And it was one of those places where they had, an upper deck, and it was probably 25, 30,000 people there. It was a big night. And we're walking out, and you couldn't hardly see, and we were exhausted, tired. And Ivan was in front of me, so I was right behind him, and I'm looking up in the lights, and I saw something coming out of the balcony, and it was heading right towards Ivan. I jumped in front of Ivan, pushed him aside, and it hit me square in the head. And man, I thought it was like a bullet that hit me. I mean, it hit, and I started getting kind of dizzy, and I was ready to go down, and blood coming out of my head immediately. And Ivan grabs me and goes, "Oh, Crush," he says, "you saved my life," And anyways, he reaches down, and he picks it up, and we get in the dressing room, and I mean, I'm dizzy, and I'm thinking to myself, "Oh my God, what did I get hit with?" He pulls it out, and it's a hot dog, and it had a giant bolt in it. So the hot dog came, and you know how heavy a bolt was. That's what hit me in the head. And if the bolt would have hit me, it probably would have, I don't know what I would have done, but it ended up being I got probably 5-6 stitches and had a freaking lump in my head. But anyways, what ended up happening was, so we had these matches everywhere, and there was so much heat with these guys. We had a match in Spartanburg, South Carolina, and it was an hour-long match, but right before the hour, the Rock and Roll Express beat us. And it was a sellout crowd, and it wasn't a very big building. It probably held, 6,000 people or whatever, but it was jam-packed. And when we lost the titles, the air came out of, I mean, it was so unbelievable. The cheer was so loud. Ivan and I were laying on the mat. I couldn't even breathe. It was like they took the air out of the room, and the Rock and Roll Express won these titles. And I'm looking at Ivan, I'm going, Ivan, I have never ever heard a crowd like this before in my life. And even to this day, winning the titles in the WWE or the WWF, whatever, all the matches I've ever had, I never ever had a pop like that before in my life that I've ever heard. And I crawled over to Ivan in the ring, and we were just laying there going, "Holy shit, what a match that was!" And the whole dressing room bailed out and came up to the Rock and Roll Express and were congratulating him. It was like the biggest angle, bigger angle than I've ever been in or anything, and it was phenomenal. And we got out of the ring, and I said to Ivan, I go, Ivan, was that a hell of a match? And we both said, Jesus, thank you. And I thanked him. And, after they had their, interview out in front of the crowd and with all the guys, and interview in the dressing room with all the baby faces and everything. And, we were in our dressing room, they were in their dressing room, and the whole place emptied out. And we got together with them, and they thanked us. And it was like, that was the greatest moment in my life for wrestling at that time. And I don't even remember where we were at. Oh, it's the Rock and Roll Express. So, anyways, these guys were phenomenal. They would do anything you wanted to do, and you could count on them when it was time for them to make their comeback. You better be in shape because you were going to fly. And it was so fun because normally as a heel, you're calling the whole match and doing everything. With those guys, you could let them call it, and they called the match just like you would have called, but even wanted you to even get more heat on them. So, one of my, in fact, the last match that I had after my new knee, being at the age I am now, was the Rock and Roll Express. We were in Raleigh, North Carolina. So Ricky and Robert, I love those guys. Great guys.
Is it as impressive as the stories go as far as the amount of... Oh, can you hear me now?
Could you repeat that? You're broken up at the very beginning.
We always hear the stories of all the girls that the Rock and Roll Express had in those days. Are those stories true?
Well, I don't want to get into any of that stuff, but the girls loved them. Let's put it that way. Everywhere they were at, the girls were just screaming. It was unbelievable. But those two guys, I love them. Like I say, they were my last match of my career too.
Now, you ended up going to WWE, of course, for your most well-remembered gimmick as Demolition Smash. How did you transition from Crockett over to Vince?
Okay, that was a heck of a story. So now I'm having a very successful time in Crockett's territory, and the territory really reminded me a lot of Louisiana, and a lot of the same guys from Louisiana were in Crockett's territory too. And it was a really tough territory because we were doing TVs for Crockett, and then we were doing TVs for Georgia Championship Wrestling in Atlanta. So you were working a lot, and you had to make some money. Well, I was making some pretty good money, but not as good as money as I thought I should have made. And we ended up doing the deal with the Rock and Roll Express. And earlier I was talking about how it was one of the greatest matches ever. We dropped the titles to them. Well, we were supposed to have, this was kind of the build-up for a Starrcade or American Bash, one of the two, I can't remember what it was, for that match. And when you're in those territories back then, those big shows, those are the shows that you build your whole angle up and everything for that show, because then you can get a heck of a payday. Well, we did all of that with the Rock and Roll Express, and I was all set up to have the rematch with those guys at that big show. Well, it ended up being where they were going to put Nikita in there, and I didn't know why Nikita didn't have a single match at that time, because Nikita at that point was getting to be where he was getting to be a heck of a single wrestler, and he could have worked anybody in a single match, but they ended up putting Nikita in the match with him and Nikita against the Rock and Roll Express. Well, I got really upset about that, and I ended up having a match with Sam Houston, which I love Sam Houston, and he was a great guy to work with, but that wasn't the same as working with the Rock and Roll Express. So Crockett told me, he says, you know what, I'm going to pay you the same as if you were in that match. I thought, well, at least I can, get something out of it, and I didn't know what that payday was going to be. But anyways, so the whole thing was built up to that match, and I wasn't in it. And it ended up being where it was a heck of a pay-per-view. And we got to TV, and we were doing interviews. I think it was like on a Tuesday or something. We're all at interviews, and we got our paychecks. And I got my paycheck, and I'm sitting by Ivan, and I look at my paycheck, and it was like $2,500. And for a sellout crowd and a pay-per-view, I'm thinking to myself, well, I've made more than this, on regular shows. I said, Ivan, I hate to ask you what you got paid, but I got paid $2,500. And he looked at me, and I said, I know you didn't get that. And he says, Barry, he said, everybody called me Crush. He says, Crush, he says, I know what you're going to do. He says, please don't do it. And I said, Ivan, I said, in this business, I've always told the truth. You've always told the truth. I've always been honest with everybody, and I expect everybody to be honest with me. And I said, I was told I was going to make the same as what you and Nikita and the Rock and Roll were going to get paid. And I'm not. And I said, I got to say something. And so Ivan pulled me aside, and he says, so let's talk about this a little bit. And, we've always talked about whenever you go in and talk to the boss about money, you better be ready to leave. And because they're going to either give you what you want, or they're going to give you an ultimatum. Well, if you don't like it, get out. So me and Ivan were going over that, and I said, Ivan, I hate to leave you. I said, I hate to leave Nikita in this territory, because all the guys were unbelievable. Midnight Express was in there. Rock and Roll Express, Magnum TA, Flair. It was just an incredible territory. But I thought, you know what? If he screws me on this payday, he's going to start screwing me on other paydays. So, if I was going to make $300 on a night, now he's going to start paying me $200 because he knows I'm going to do it. It's just the way they are. Promoters are like that. So, and I'm thinking, and he probably knows I'm a nice guy, so I'll just take it and not say nothing. So I went in to Dusty first, and I said, Dusty, I said, I just got my paycheck, and it's a lot less than what everybody else got, and I'm supposed to get the same thing as I was going to get it if I was in the match, because I was supposed to be in the match. And Dusty closes the door, and he says, Barry, I'm really sorry. I didn't know about what the paydays were or anything, but he says, I had to put Nikita in the match. That's just what the boss wanted. And, it worked out where you were with Sam Houston, and you could work an angle with Sam Houston. And I said, yeah, but I don't want to work an angle with Sam Houston. I'm a tag now with Ivan. And he says, yeah, but you've already been the world champions. You've been the American champions. I said, yeah, I totally understand. So he says, so what are you going to do? I says, well, I got to go talk to Jimmy Crockett. He goes, Barry, don't do that. I says, well, I just want to give you this belt right now because I don't know what Jimmy Crockett's going to say. And I said, this could be my last day. Who knows? Because I thought maybe if I said this could be my last day, he might go, Barry, just stay right here. I'll go talk for you. Well, he didn't. So anyways, I go into Jim Crockett's office. I said, Jim, can I talk to you? He goes, well, I'm really busy. And I said, well, I'm really busy too. I said, I need to talk to you. He says, all right, what's up? Well, he knew what it was up. He knew that he screwed me on a payday. He says, so what's going on? I said, well, you promised me, because this whole angle we did with the Rock and Roll Express and all this, I was going to be in that match at that pay-per-view, and you put Nikita in there instead of me. But you said, to make me feel good, I guess, that I'll get paid the same as what I will in that match, knowing you weren't going to do that, but you were going to screw me. So I said, well, I'd like to get the rest of that money. He says, I'm not giving you the rest of the money. The match you were in is what you got paid for that match. And I said, well, that was the shits. He said to me, he says, Barry, he says, that's exactly what you deserve for that match. I said, Jimmy, but wait a minute. I said, so you're telling me right to my face that you're going to lie to me, that you told me you were going to pay me the same as what they were going to make in their match when I worked with Sam Houston, and now you're telling me you're not. So you're telling me right to my face that I'm a liar. He says, I'm not going to say I'm a liar, but that's what that match paid. I said, Jimmy, you're a liar. You're a liar and you're a thief. And I said, I'll tell you what, one thing in this wrestling business that's worse than anybody, and that's a thief. I says, back in the dressing room, if somebody steals from you, you put the boots to them and you do whatever you can to keep them alive, because you want to punish them, because there's nothing worse than a thief. When you trust everybody in the dressing room with your wallets and your watches and your money, you trust everybody that they're not going to steal from you. And when there's a thief, that's like the scum of the earth. And you're telling me that you're the scum of the earth. And he says, no, I'm telling you that that's what that match paid. And I said, Jimmy, if you don't pay me what you said you were going to pay me, this is my last day. I said, I already gave Dusty the belt. And I said, I hate to leave on these terms, but there's nothing worse than a liar and a thief. And he says, well, then you got to leave. So anyways, I came back and I talked to Ivan, and Ivan says, you're done, aren't you? And I said, I'm done. And I remember Bobby Eaton and Dennis Congree and all. He says, man, he says, don't leave. And, and it was like, I got him. He lied. I said, and he's going to do the same thing to you guys. He might have already done it to you guys. I don't know. But I said, I when somebody tells me something, I do it. And that's how I've been to everybody. At least I try. I do everything I can to do whatever I say I'm going to do. And that was when I left there, and I was married, and me and my wife, I told my wife, I said, well, get ready. We got to go to another territory. I said, I need some time off because it's been a rough trip. And, being there for a couple of years was a lot of road time. And, we saved up some money, and, I had a house down there. I said, let me just get a couple of months off here. And I said, I'll get back and we'll get another job. But I said, we might have to sell the house and move. So she was fine with it. And then I talked to Hebner, who was one of the referees. And Hebner says, oh, what are you going to do? He says, well, I'm going to call Vince first thing. I said, I don't know if I can get a job up there or not. He says, hey, but my brother's up there. He says, let me make a phone call for you. So then his brother calls me back. He says, hey, Barry, he says, I put out a couple of feelers for you. He says, just hold off for a little while. And then I ended up, I was training at Ricky Steamboat's gym, and I told Ricky the story, and Ricky goes, that's just like Crockett. He says, let me make a call for you. So Steamboat calls me up, and in the meantime, Flair is telling me, Barry, don't leave it, and all that. I said, Rick, I got to go. I said, I've learned so much in this business. I can work in any territory now. Anybody would be glad to have me. I said, I hate to leave here. So Ricky makes this phone call, and I'm thinking, yeah, they're just calling, and, who's talking to who and what and everything. Well, about 2 days later, so now this is like a week after I quit my job, Vince McMahon calls me up at home, and so I answer. I go, hello, and he says, Vince McMahon here. He says, is this Barry? And I said, yeah. And he says, I'd like to talk to you about, I want to set up a meeting with you. I hear that you're looking for a job. I said, Vince, I said, yeah, I really am. I really appreciate you calling. I never expected it right now, but I said, thank you for calling. And he says, I'll have a I'll have a ticket for you later on today. I'll have a limo pick you up, and we'll see you at the towers tomorrow. Take it easy. And I'm thinking to myself, when he asked me, he says, "You want a job?" I'm thinking to myself, well, I'm kind of busy right now, and let me check my schedule. I thought, no, I ain't gonna do that. I'm just gonna, yeah, I'll be up there, right? So I ended up getting a call from him. Had a plane ticket waiting for me and a limo, and he picked up, and that was the end of the territory with Crockett. And I still didn't know what was in front of me, but it was like, here we go again.
I think we're going to have to do a part two, so I'll wait to get into the WWE stuff for part two. But just to backtrack a little bit, you were there in the NWA Crockett territory when Magnum TA had his accident. You were actually involved in an angle with him and Nikita. Could you talk to us about what it was like for the whole territory when a guy like that, who I understand was well liked and about to get an even bigger push, possibly a future world champion, had that kind of tragic accident?
Yep, definitely. Um, you know, in that territory, in Crockett's territory, every single person in that territory, um, they were incredible wrestlers. I mean, from the bottom of the card, could have been a main event, you know. And what was kind of nice about the territory, it did kind of switch around and rotate, the matches you had, except for, Flair and Dusty, a couple of the big time baby faces, they were never going to be on the opening cards. But, other main events would, win titles, lose titles, then go back down and end up being opening matches again and work your way up and find another angle and get up there. And the whole territory was kind of like that. But now Magnum TA, he was, um, in fact, in Mid South, I was with him there, and that's when I first met him. And Magnum was unbelievable guy, and good looking, young guy, good body, had a good promo, and he could work. And he would do anything that anybody wanted him to do in matches. Um, but by the time he got up to Crockett's territory, he really learned how to become a top baby face. And him and Dusty were good friends. So Dusty was grooming him to be the big champion. And it's really hard to get into a position like that. And because there's a lot that's asked for you. I mean, you have to be the champion, a single champion in a territory. You have to, you have to be greedy. You have to be selfish. You can't you can't um, be in a match with somebody and not be the top guy. And so you really have to look out for yourself. And Magnum was finally at that point to where he was really groomed and knew what he was doing. And it ended up being where we were going to do an angle with him, and it was going to be to where Magnum and Nikita were going to end up having single matches. And I think, and it's hard to remember every angle that you do and everything, but I can't remember what town we were in, but Magnum ended up getting in a car accident, and I didn't hear about it until the next morning, but I couldn't believe it because I was really good friends with Magnum. And it ended up being where um, he wasn't ever going to be able to wrestle again. And in that territory, because of the way the territory was, where everybody got to work with pretty much everybody, you got to be really good friends with people. And it wasn't just like it was, you wrestle a guy and, that was the end of it. You never talked to him much again or anything. This is where you traveled. You were, you know, you'd be at parties together, kayfabe, of course. But the wives were friends with everybody and the guys were friends. And so when Magnum got hurt, I mean, it was devastating to the whole company because, it was something where it could have been me. It could have been Ivan and Nikita or anybody in the territory. It could have been Rick, where he went off the road and got hurt like that. So it really hit home for everybody. And it was almost like, hey, we got to start really watching out for ourselves and taking care of ourselves a little bit more because you don't know when your last day in this ring's going to be. So it was pretty devastating to the whole territory and devastating to Magnum too, but it was pretty brutal.
Now, you're from Minnesota, of course. You mentioned earlier in this interview that Wayne Bloom trained at Jesse Ventura's gym. Do you have any stories about Jesse from Minnesota?
I didn't really know Jesse very well back then. Um, I trained at a different gym and I met him and I know I know him and Wayne. Wayne was dating his wife's sister at the time, so Wayne and Jesse, knew each other very well. And Jesse, back in those days, you wanted to protect the business, incredible, which he did. But you know, he used to always brag how tough the wrestlers were. How when you're a pro wrestler, you want to make it sound like you're much tougher than you are to a regular person, and and you probably are, but he was saying something to Wayne one time. Jesse was, and I love Jesse. He's a great guy, and I get along with him. But he'll probably get mad at me for telling the story, and I wasn't there, so I don't know if things were exaggerated or what. But I know how tough Wayne is. Wayne's a tough guy. He's gone through the mill, and back then that's when we started training. He was getting strong, and that was when he got the name Wayne the Train Bloom. Well, him and Jesse were kind of going, talking at it and everything, laughing. And Jesse says, if I put the sugar hold on you, you'd never get out of it. And Wayne says, there ain't a chance, Jesse, you could put me in any hole that I couldn't get out of. Well, Jesse really didn't realize how strong Wayne was and how wiry Wayne was and how, Wayne can pretty much do anything. So Jesse says, let me put it on you, and I guarantee you'll never get out of this thing. So Wayne says, all right, you're on. And I mean, but it was a big, big hula. I wasn't there, but it was at Jesse's gym. So they went out in the parking lot, and there was quite a few guys out there, I guess. So Wayne says, so I'm going to let you put the sugar hold on me, and you're saying I can't get out of this. And Jesse says, that's right. Nobody gets out of the sugar hold. Well, Jesse puts it on it, and Wayne, struggling a little bit. Wayne gets it on him, switches on him, and gets it on him. Some kind of hold or whatever. So it just shows that you don't ever want to say something to somebody. Wayne wasn't a wrestler. He was just a weightlifter, a skinny little scrawny guy who was unbelievably strong. And you're a pro wrestler who's like the toughest guy in the world. And when you really think that you're like that without really being that, you get yourself into trouble. And that's what happened to Jesse.
Now, I know you're on Twitter. Where can people follow you on social media if they want to look you up?
Oh, can you repeat it? Whenever you start back, it's like it's all, goofy.
Okay. Where can people follow you on social media?
The only thing is I'm at Real Demo Smash. I really don't get on there very much and do things. I'm so busy all the time, and I never know what to say. At Real Demo Smash, I think that's what I better try to pull it up. So I don't even know what it is exactly. That's my Twitter. So let me pull it up here.
So I guess no Facebook or anything else.
What's that?
Are you on Facebook or anything else?
No, I'm not on any of the Facebooks or anything. But yeah, it's real at Demo Smash is my Twitter account. And I get on there when I travel a little bit and do some things, but I'm not on there like you're on yours all the time. And you know what I mean?
Right.
I'm an old timer that just, I'm just happy just talking to the fans and doing whatever, you know.
And how's Bill holding up these days?
You know, Bill is doing really good, and I love Bill. Um, you know, when we go on the road, you know, we catch up with the grandkids now. You know, it used to be when we were on the road, you know, how your daughter's doing, you know, how's your son doing? You know, now it's how are the grandkids doing? And then you start hearing all the stories about them. Um, Bill still is teaching school. He teaches about 2 or 3 days a week. And then he's at home with the family. He started training again, kind of like I'm trying to, you know, and, you know, we both struggle, you know, trying to get in the gym and trying to do things with the family and all that stuff. But I tell you, when the demolition split up and I became the repo man, that was the one thing I really did miss was Bill because we were together all the time, and it didn't work out when Bill went his way and I went my way. Um, but after all the wrestling was done, and then you know I finished up at um, down in WCW. We started talking again a lot and became friends and started doing all this stuff all over again. And Bill is a first class, smart guy in this business. And, you know, I think that somebody should have picked him up to be a booker or, you know, some kind of an agent or something because he's got ideas that I, he's, you know, I don't remember things like I used to. And he just can come up with finishes and this and that. And he's another one of those guys. You tell Bill something, you better do it because whatever he says, he does. And that's probably why we get along so well. And um, I'm meeting him. Let's see, day after tomorrow. I'm flying to Charlotte tomorrow, and I'm going to see my wife's family down there, and then I'm hooking up with Bill the next day, and we're going to Roanoke, Virginia. So I really look forward to the trips when I get to get with Bill, because then we can just start talking the old times.
And to close this off, we're definitely going to have to do a part two in maybe a couple weeks and get into your WWE and WCW days. But could you give us maybe since you were doing we were talking about Crusher Khrushchev today? Could you close this off maybe with a Crusher promo?
Oh, so you broke up again. I couldn't hear you.
Okay. We're gonna have to in 2 or 3 weeks maybe do a part two where we get into your WWE career in detail and your WCW stuff. But to close this off today, I was wondering if you could give us a little Crusher Khrushchev promo.
Holy cow! I don't even know if I could do that anymore. I don't even know what to say. Um, um, yeah, that you're gonna have to hit me up on another one with that one because I got to get it. I have to get in the mode for a Crusher Khrushchev interview. It's tough for me to pull that one out of my grad bag. Um, yeah,
All right. Well,
we got to do that a different time when I can really think about that.
here's an easy one. You want to just close this off by giving a message to the fans here that have watched this for about 2 hours now?
Perfect. And then I'll say my goodbyes then. I'll tell you what, Hannibal is, you know, what a great show you have. It was great to see you and talk to you again. And I'll tell you, when you got a hold of me on the email and everything, and you said, "Yeah, I want you to spend a couple hours on there," I'm thinking to myself, how am I going to talk 2 hours on stories about myself? But I guess I could go a lot longer. Um, but I'll tell you what, you got a heck of a fan base, and the fans are what have made Crusher Khrushchev, have made the Blacktop Bully, and the Demolition, and all that. And I just want to thank every one of you for listening to me, and me telling some of my stories, and it gets kind of exciting for me to think back of the old days, and I appreciate every one of you, and keep watching all the shows. They're fantastic, but thank you, and I appreciate it.
Good. Thank you. There's one more thing.
Right?
Can you hear me now? Sorry.
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay. Could you there apparently you have quite a fan base in Chile, and there's a Facebook page from Chile that contacted me when they found out I was going to interview you, and they were wondering if you could just give them a plug and say, "Hey,
Okay.
this is." Oh, can you hear me now?
So they have a Facebook on me.
Well, they have like a wrestling Facebook page in Chile, but
Okay.
they're fans of you. And if I tell you the name of the page, I was wondering if you could just tell people to check it out for them, and I'll send them that clip, and they'll post it.
Yep, definitely.
It's called Solo Para Fans WWE. Solo Para.
Let me write it down.
Okay.
Sola. You keep breaking up. Solo
Para. PARA. Fans WWE. If you could just say, "This is Barry Darsow," check out the Chile Facebook page, Solo Para Fans WWE.
Okay. Okay, Chile Facebook page. Check out a Chile Facebook page, Solo Para Fans WWE. So say WWE too?
I guess that's part of the name of the page. It has nothing to do with WWE. It's just what the page is called.
Okay. All right. Hey, I got to do a shout out here to Chile. It's unbelievable, Chile. There's a Facebook page that they have. It's called Solo Para Fans WWE. I want to say this is Barry Darsow. I was one of the Demolition Smash, and I'd love it for all the fans to go see them on Facebook and really watch them. And I'm going to start myself.
Great.